Hello and welcome to Arvos of Harvo. It is the end of 2024. It's the third year that I've been making these silly videos, and we're going to do the same thing that we usually do. We're going to take all the books that I read this year, and we're going to build a small fort. Alright, and that is my books of 2024. I keep forgetting how precarious this activity is. I am very foolishly balancing the microphone also on some books. But this is almost every book this year. I actually couldn't find a bunch, which is interesting. I don't know if I've gotten to that point in my life where I'm losing track of all the books that I own, but I do think that it is time to archive a few of these, and I'm looking at some of the ones that I picked out and definitely can think of a few that I don't want on my shelves anymore. So I'm going to be dropping those off at some local libraries or used bookstores or even like street libraries, just getting rid of them because there are so many of these. Every time I do this, I think just having them all laid out like this is a staggering activity because how much time and concentration have I sunk into all of these at the course of this year. So what I will do is I'll talk through the various categories, I will show the various books that count for each of these, and we will wrap up and talk about best books of the year and plans for next year. I think I've read enough good books this year to even do a top 10, so that's going to be something to look forward to. Top 10, top 5, I don't really know. We're going to talk through some categories. I've only got like 40% on my laptop, so we've got to hurry up here. Category number 1, down here, is the final bosses of the year. So this year I only read 6 books that I would consider as part of the final boss category. I finished The Lord of the Rings, I finished Ulysses, Anna Karenina, the Iliad, the Odyssey, and that's only 5. The Sound of the Fury. These were all really difficult books, and I'm very glad I finished them, but they did take a toll on me, and they were a lot harder than I thought they were going to be, especially Ulysses. I thought very naively that I could finish one of these per month, and I just haven't. There are so many more still left on my shelf that I have to do next year. I want to do the Count of Monte Cristo, I want to do Vanity Fair, I want to do War and Peace is still down there. There's still so many books that are very big that I've got to get through. So not a very good idea for a category. It really burnt me out really fast. But of the books that I did read, I did quite enjoy them. And some of them I felt were easier than I thought they were going to be. So Anna Karenina was a bit easier. The Sound of the Fury was a bit easier. The Lord of the Rings, it was fine. But that's that category. A separate video is made for each of those. Why would you go out of your way to watch them? But it's fine. Next category. So we have all the books that I read in February, which are the very short ones. That's a separate video. No need to talk about those. This year, next category was a make me laugh. So I tried to pick books that would deliberately make me laugh, and I worked through a bunch of different types of genres and types of books that are considered humorous. I had travelogues like Notes from a Small Island. I had various comic novels, picaresque novels, novels with protagonists that are funny, and novels that have jokes in them. Generally, if I thought that their press or their marketing suggested that it was funny, then I would just go out of my way to read it. And I learned quite a bit about comedic writing. I felt like some books had just jokes in them, and some books had more comedic story structures in them. I do like the idea of comedy, and I do feel like quite challenging books get marketed as comedies, because when things get absurd enough, there's only really one thing you can do, and that's to laugh. So I'm trying to enjoy these more, but I also get kind of held up on how comedy really doesn't age very well. Things that were funny 20, 30 years ago are just kind of cringe or embarrassing today, and I think that's just going to continue, right? The things that we find funny today, we probably won't find so funny in 20 or 30 years again. It's just kind of the consequences of the medium, but really as a method of the author demonstrating their skill, comedy is still a very worthwhile genre to do. And if you can just use words and make an audience laugh, then that is a really big achievement. So that's the making a laugh category. Of these, the best one I would say would have to be... It's stiff competition, actually. It's funny because I think in terms of raw skill, it would go to A Confederacy of Dunces or Gulliver's Travels or Bridget Jones' Diary. But A Prayer for Owen Meany, maybe because I've read it the most recently, sticks in my head the most. That is a book that has funny lines but also funny premises. I would love to just spoil the plot and describe to somebody who doesn't care about it and just see how ridiculous I can make it, because it is just such a bizarre book and a bizarre plot, a very well written character, and all of it just feels very deliberate to try and make the reader chuckle. So it is a bit sad as well, but overall I would qualify that as a comedy. Next category, so the bottom of this stack is my make me cry books. I sought out books deliberately to make me cry. Now I'm not a very emotional person. I've cried maybe like 4 or 5 times in the last 10 years, I would say. It doesn't happen to me very often. And most of those times happen to have been books, actually. So not necessarily this year, but sometimes a book will just get me really, really good, and it just makes the emotions start flowing, which is really cool, because same with the comedies, isn't it weird that just words can make us feel things that we never felt before, that we can help us understand the emotions of somebody else, can help us feel so strongly that it's even more than some of the actual emotional things that are going on in my life. I just think it's such a valuable thing, right? I'm of a firm belief that sometimes our negative emotions do need to be purged out. I'm a big believer in catharsis, and so it has been a weird, painful joy to read some books this year that have actually tried to make me cry. So it started off on a bad foot. A Man Called Ove, I know that people love this book. It just didn't really do it for me. And I don't like the feeling of something that's very deliberately trying to make you cry and then failing. So that's not a high point for me. But over the course of these books through this year, there are definitely a few books that got to me. But again, the most recent one, Cold Enough for Snow, is probably what I'd say is the best for this list. So Cold Enough for Snow, such a simple novel, just ordinary interaction between a mother and a daughter on their holiday to Japan. Nothing overtly emotional. I think that's maybe what makes it get to me, is that if I think it's going to happen, like if I think this is going to be a sad book, if it's like crying in H-Mart, and it's about the act of making me cry, I think my emotions get quite guarded, because subconsciously something in me just wants to say that expressing emotions is a bad thing. So if I'm on my guard and knowing that I'm about to cry, then I will just kind of control that and stop myself and look for reasons why I'm not going to feel emotional. Whereas something like Cold Enough for Snow, it just got right under my defenses. It was just so ordinary. And then at the end, you realize that just every ordinary interaction, everything you say to someone that you care about matters in the long run. That just got me so good. It made me so grateful for the relationships and friendships that I have, that I can recognize how much somebody else means to me just from the way that I might help them with a small task or ask them how the day is going. It just made me value those moments so much more. So Cold Enough for Snow, massive recommendation. Lots of great books in this category as well, so it's pretty hard to choose. Next category. So this year I thought I would read one Booker Prize winner per month, and that has been a weird ride. To be honest, kind of a disappointing ride. I love the idea of a big centralizing award to try and say what the best book of the year was, but I think there's just so many difficulties in fairly choosing what that's going to be, and the Booker Prize has always been controversial, just being first a remnant of the British Commonwealth. Up until the mid-2010s, only books from British Commonwealth countries were eligible, and it meant that it was kind of split between books from the UK and books from various parts of the world. We had some from Australia, some from India, some from Canada, just variously traveling around. And then when the gates opened to being a fully international, any country eligible prize, we had a few American winners. So I read The Sellout and I read Lincoln and the Bardo, which I believe are still the 2 only US winners so far. Does Orbital count? Maybe the 3? But what I really wanted from reading the Mad Booker Prizes was to go out of my comfort zone, to read books that are different from what I would normally read, that were considered on some objective scale to be very good. And I don't know if maybe I'm just getting a bit jaded or a bit hard to please sometimes, because some of these I read and I thought, really, this was the best one of the year? And some of them I actually thought, no, this is not the best one of the year. There are better books that I read from that year that I can actually describe for you. So overall, it's been an interesting ride. I actually think the later years have been more interesting. So I quite liked Milkman, I quite liked The Inheritance of Loss, I quite liked Lincoln and the Bardo. Some of these later books I've really liked, A Brief History of 7 Killings. So the later books are fine. Earlier on, I feel like the Booker Prizes really do have a type. The type that you're looking for if you're looking for the book winners of the 90s and 80s and the 2000s, early 2000s, they really like playing with this idea of truth and memory, and they really like having unreliable narrators. They like to have older narrators look back on their childhood and realize that their recollections of events were not quite what they thought. So that describes, I would say, probably 10 to 20 different Booker winners. It would describe The Remains of the Day, a sense of an ending, a few things on here as well. It's just a common trope. And I got a bit exhausted of it after a while. It got to a point where I would be reading a Booker Prize winner and thinking, oh, so it's going this direction again, you know? And so it's refreshing to me when it doesn't. I'm going to keep continuing with this. So after this year's challenge, I have read about 26 or 27 Booker Prize winners out of a total of 60. So this is going to be a repeating category next year to get me to around 40, 45 Booker Prize winners, and hopefully finishing that the year after that, and just tying a bow around it and not having to worry about it anymore. I think part of it is just this really misguided aspiration that I have, that I want to one day win one of these, and I want to figure out what it takes to win one of them. And maybe reading all of them is a start. I don't know, maybe that's just too far-fetched. Speaking of books that I read to bolster my own creative process as well, the short story collections. At the start of the year, I really wanted to write more short stories. I really wanted to hone my ability with this particular medium. And so I decided to read collections of short stories to better understand the medium and what's possible with it. And now at the end of the year, I have not written a single short story. And I also don't feel particularly motivated to do that anymore. I think the problem that I hit with these categories is that reading a full collection of short stories, you end up with a number of stories that are quite samey or similar, and it just kind of impedes on your progress. So I have these towards the top of these two piles. Some of them are certainly very innovative and very experimental. A Girl with Curious Hair is a fantastic collection. Winsburg, Ohio is also a surprisingly good collection, which how varied it is and how unexpected the stories are. But I also definitely read a few collections where the stories kind of either bled into one another, or I would forget what many of the stories were in the collection and just remember the best ones. So Two Houses in Get in Trouble, Brokeback Mountain in Close Range, and Barn Burning and the Second Bakery Attack in The Elephant Vanishes. There would just be one or two stories that would be so emblematic of the collection that everything else just kind of faded away, and that was a bit annoying to me. I think maybe my ambitions again are a bit too lofty. I want to write something that is different and novel and unexpected, and when I'm reading these collections and I'm starting to see stories kind of blend into one another, it just takes away the motivation for me, because there are these really established authors that are doing so much work with this medium, and they're still not hitting every time. It just makes me feel like a bit demotivated, because I wonder, how am I ever going to surpass that? Because these are authors that I really respect, but this is a really hard medium to wrangle. Of the collection, though, I would absolutely recommend A Manual for Cleaning Women. I really hope I'm pointing at the right ones. This one or this one, I don't know. But it is a fantastic collection. It's one of those books where just every story is incredible, and you just feel like you know humanity much better after finishing it. So Manual for Cleaning Women, 5 out of 5. Incredible book. And the last set, so I wanted to finish some series finishes. And I ended up finishing 3 book series this year. I finished Northern Lights, which I finished at the start of the year, so I don't remember it very much as well, but as a young adult fantasy series, I thought it was fine, I thought it was okay. I thought it was interesting how all of the long-running fantasy series that I've read, the books towards the end tend to get longer and more off the rails, because I imagine the editor would just give more leeway to the author about what they want to do. So the first book in the series, to me, tends to be my favorite every time. So Northern Lights is my favorite, because it just is tight. It's just like well planned and well structured, and then The Subtle Knife kind of goes and expands the universe, and then The Amber Spyglass, which I read this year, is just double the length of the other 2 books, and it's just a bit off the rails. Like, it includes all these additional things that weren't in the series previously, and I mean, if you're continuing with the series and it's fine, you get to see characters you're familiar with, but it's not going to draw any more people into the series, right? It's not going to... No one's going to read it if they haven't read the first few books. So I was a bit mixed. I read Rabbit Run and then Rabbit Redux. I don't know if I want to keep going with that series. It's a bit depressing, to be honest. It's just very depressing literary fiction. But the two series that I did go all the way to the end is the 4-book series, the Neapolitan novels, which is My Brilliant Friend, Those Who, Story of a New Name, Those Who Leave for Those Who Stay, and The Story of the Lost Child. These 4 books were incredible, just amazing. They are kind of just like one big novel though. So each book is about 120 to 160,000 words. If you add them all together, you get something that's kind of just like an Anna Karenina, or something like just like a David Copperfield, just like a very long series of novels. And they follow characters you're familiar with, and they're just very melodramatic. I think the reason why they're split up, I mean, they are kind of self-enclosed, they do work by themselves, but also each one has a different dramatic focus. So I guess if you had it in just one big book, you would lose that structure, whereas having it as 4 separate books, each one is a real ride. And every time I read one, it would just warp my life for the time that I was reading it, because it was so emotionally powerful. And the other set of 4 books that I read, also loved very much, is the Gilead series by Marilyn Robinson. So it's Gilead, Home, Lila, and Jack. These are about a family of preachers in Iowa around the time of the mid-1900s and a bit earlier as well. And it's chronicling the family as they develop across the American history. We have one character named Jack, and he gets a lot of focus across these 4 books. He's kind of like a prodigal son kind of character. He's the son of a preacher, and he, from birth, misbehaves and loses the respect of the small town. And so this ends up in this really negative cycle where he ends up imprisoned and in a different city in St. Louis in a relationship with an African-American woman in a time of segregation, and then trying to make everything up back to his family and to the family of the woman that he fell in love with, just atoning for things. This is all connected with some fairly thoughtful meditations on Christian theology. There's very small differences. So there's 2 pastors that I focus on. There is a Baptist pastor and a Presbyterian pastor. And it's a bit complex what the differences are, but it means that they have some disagreements on spiritual things, and that spills out to the way they treat their close relationships as well. It just makes everything a lot more nuanced, and the writing style is so crisp and beautiful that it just makes you feel for these characters really clearly. So I enjoyed this set of books. I don't know if I would recommend it as much because it does have some prior knowledge required. It is much better with knowledge of theology, but it is a fantastic series of books as well. Okay, so that is 100. Oh, and new prescriptions for the HSC. I read basically a book a day towards the end of December, trying to finish some of these books that are on the new prescription list. A lot of them are pretty good, but I have my reservations about how they might work in a classroom of 25 teenagers. So I do want to make a video early in January covering the various modules and the various texts that are prescribed, and just giving a quick summary, hopefully to help out teachers or students or whoever might be watching, or just leave a time capsule of the books that we are teaching in New South Wales at this current time, just to see what things are like. Alright, so a very quick top 5 before I forget. Number 5, from all the way at the start of the year, Fences by August Wilson. This is a play from the 1980s in America, but there is just a line in here that is just so powerful that's just stuck with me the entire time. The entire play is kind of about masculinity, but especially about building one's own in one's community, and the almost tragic nature of that. So the masculine urge, kind of build a fence around your house and scream at death and say, "You cannot get in here." What a fantastic book. 4, it would be Invisible Man. Just a lot of different things going on in this book. Sometimes funny, sometimes sad, just a very big journey across America. It's chronicling the African-American experience. But what's so poignant to me about this book is just how influential it feels, or feels like it should be. So it really does precede a lot of the great American novel traditions, and it just covers all of it so poetically and so emotionally. It's just a really fantastic achievement, and I would almost want to say required reading for anyone that wants to go into American literature. Like, I'm ashamed that it took me this long to read this book and realize how good it is. It is just so... It's just such a cornerstone of everything that I feel like American literature from the 1950s onwards should stand for. So it's just fantastic, fantastic work. Number 3, A Manual for Cleaning Women. This is a collection of short stories, as I alluded to before, about mostly autofictive stories about the narrator working service-level jobs across the southern United States and Mexico, about the various relationships that she forms and just how much emotion and feeling goes into every moment of her life. And also just the importance of small details, the possessions that we have, the gestures and mannerisms that we have, and just the cadence of the writing is just really impeccable. There's just a rhythm and a beauty to everything that's being described, and somehow all of that coalesces into really powerful short stories. It's a book that works on two levels. Like, you can analyze it and realize how dense and intricate everything is, or you can just read it for its face value and just be spellbound by the magic trick every single time in every single story. It is just incredible. Number 2, Lincoln the Bardo. So of the book prize winners, I'm gladdest that I read this one. This one is just so different from everything else that's come out, and George Saunders is just, what a strange and innovative writer. Like, he's someone who's really pushing the boundaries of what fiction really is. He went through just a massive process to gather together all of this archival information about Abraham Lincoln and the son that passes away, and puts this strange scenario where they're stuck in this afterlife where they don't really have bodies or anything. They're trying to figure out what death really means, but it's interlaced with history and the various conflicting views of Abraham Lincoln as a human being, where no historian seems to really be able to agree on who he was in regards to this situation and how this might have affected him later in his life. I just think it's such a personal look at someone who is so mythologized, and it's just such a fantastic way to explore how even the most powerful people in the world can also be very ordinary and very vulnerable, and how do we care for them in those circumstances. So it's a fantastic work. Are they all American? Yeah, they're all American. So number 5 is Home by Marilyn Robinson, also a very American book. It is a classic prodigal son narrative, just a very simple story done really well. Just some absolutely shatteringly heartbreaking lines in here. But the sadness of it doesn't really come from the transgression itself, it comes from the difficulty that we have in accepting forgiveness. So if we wrong somebody else, sometimes we create this narrative in our own heads thinking that they must hate us, they must not forgive us. And even if they offer us some kind of forgiveness, how do we accept it, and how do we overcome whatever damage that we've faced in order to recognize that someone else actually does care for us? It is such a difficult question, and I sympathize so much with this character. It's just really, really well done, so incredibly complex. 5 American books for 2024. What a weird time. Not intended, of course, but certainly I think it does say something about my preferences and my likings that these are my top 5 of the year. And of course, dishonorable mention, bottom number 1, Vernon Godlittle. Not a good book, and made worse by the fact that it won a very prestigious prize. I just don't have any positive memories of it. Only have negative memories of it. It's just slimy and uncomfortable the whole way through, and trying to make me laugh, and I'm just kind of cringing. I can't wait to get this out of my house. So thank you for joining on this strange journey. Plans for next year. So I'm going to continue making these reading videos. I'm going to have some new categories that I might break down in the January videos. So there's not a lot that's different. The main thing is that next year I actually really want to focus on working on a longer form of writing. I want to write a novel, and the categories that I've chosen kind of align to my interests for that novel. I'm hoping it's not going to be like this short story thing and I talk myself out of it, but it's going to be about spooky settings, and it's going to be about history, and it's going to be about characters. So it's going to be trying to be a little bit more literary, but we'll see how it goes. It's still in very early stages at the moment. I just kind of know my characters, and I've got my first chapter, but I'm still ironing out how things are going. In addition to that, because I am trying to write, and because I really appreciate the way these videos kind of help me get my thoughts together, I also want to make some videos that are kind of like writing advice, but the main thing I want to focus on is I'm listening in and reading into a lot of different writers' forums and videos and content for aspiring writers, and the common thing I find is that there's so many contradictions when it comes to writing advice. Someone might say, you should always do this, or you should never do this. And in the comments, I'd always see people saying, well, this famous author does it and they're fine. Or, I tried it and it doesn't work for me, so I don't know what's wrong with your advice. There is just so much uncertainty about writing advice that I actually want to make some videos that are writing advice about writing advice. I'm thinking about calling the series The Bugbear. I don't really know why, except that I think one of the biggest bugbears in writing is show don't tell. And I do want to make a video about that sometime next year. Just what does it mean to show don't tell? How do you respond if you're given the advice to show don't tell? And are there times that you do need to tell? Are there times that you do need to show? And expanding from that, talking about different writing techniques, different methods of getting into the zone for writing. Hopefully those will be interesting. They will be scripted videos, so they will take a lot more time to make. And I'm making some big promises now because I don't know if I will succeed, but we will see how we go. Aside from that, thank you so much for joining. I will see you next year, which is not very far away at all, but thank you for joining on this reading journey. We've almost hit 300 books, so this is cool. This is big. This is something that has definitely happened.